I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on August 29th, 2023. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live and you don't see the chat room, that's okay. You're on our live page. There's a link to our YouTube page there. It'll take you there. If you're listening on LinkedIn, make your comments as well. We're watching those there. We'd love to have your questions live. If you're listening after the fact via podcast or on YouTube, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or right there on YouTube with the subscribe button. It's right down over there, so you never miss an episode. Kristen Lipton is my guest today. Kristen is a managing director for Gallup and based out of our Washington, D.C. office. And Kristen, it's always a great day when I get started with you. Welcome to Call to Coach.
Jim, thank you so much. It is wonderful to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Let's catch up with you a little bit. The last time we had you on Call to Coach, you were on the other side of the country doing other things. Catch us up a little bit. Tell us what you're doing now and give us a little bit about what you do for Gallup.
That's right. No, thank you so much. A lot has changed, certainly, since the last time we had an opportunity to connect on this platform. So my family recently moved from our Irvine office, so Southern California, all the way to the other side of the country to Washington, D.C. in our headquarters, which has been an extremely rewarding move for not only myself, but my little ones, my husband as well. So we're really, really happy to be in this community, and I've been really lucky to be met with such a warm welcome by neighbors, colleagues, and clients.
That's great. It's a long way to go. LA and DC culturally pretty different, right?
Yep.
But I'm glad to hear a little bit of pre-show. Glad to hear the kids are settling and things are going
Yeah,
well.
they are. Thanks
Yeah.
two little ones in elementary school, and so far seem to be thriving. So
Good,
yeah.
good. Well, we're in the Gray Studios. I'm here in the Omaha studio. You're in our brand new DC studio. You got a fancy mic there. What's going on with all this stuff? It's like you're a podcaster.
I know it. I can't believe it. So I literally moved across the country, was starting to unpack those boxes, which I am not done, certainly not done yet. But in the middle of that, they said, "Welcome to DC. We'd like you to host a new podcast." And of course I said, "Let's go. Sounds like a great time." I've certainly taken a ton of inspiration from you, Jim, over the years. So there is a new studio here in our DC office. It's where I'm currently sitting. It is decked out with all of the, the finest equipment that you might see in a radio station. It's quite humbling to be here, but I have used this space to record a new podcast for Gallup. It's called Thriving, and it is based on our latest report, the Gallup Global State of the Workplace Report. And it's essentially a sister podcast to our global workplace podcast that Mohammed Yunus is the host of. And so in this particular series of podcast episodes, we explore workplace issues. So it's different in that we take our cues from the global trends, but we really dig into what matters most to all of us who are either employees, parents of employees, spouses of employees, coaches to employees and managers, leaders, owners of companies and beyond. It's really applicable to all of the challenges that each of us face in the workplace today.
Yeah. And if you're interested, we'll just get this out of the way. So for folks who are listening in the first 5 minutes of it, Thriving, just go to any podcast app, put in that word. You put it Gallup Thriving or Thriving, excuse me. That podcast will come up. Or you mentioned the Gallup podcast, and that's not that hard to remember. Just remember the Gallup podcast. You can find that. Subscribe on that so you make sure you're catching up. As we think about our certified coaching community, that's kind of what this program reaches.
Absolutely.
We think the Gallup podcast is global news and information, what's going on. State of the global workplace is global, but workplace specific as we think about what's going on with the place. called to coach, thinking about the global community, but for coaches, why would a certified coach, or why would anyone listening to this program want to listen to Thriving? What would they get out of it? What would they expect?
No, it's a really great question, and I've been looking forward to coming on to speak with you because I have had the pleasure of getting to know so many of our certified coaches over the last 10 years that my team has been working directly in certifying coaches. And so understanding that certified coaches, that you all are out talking with leaders and managers about their Clifton strengths, helping transform their productivity, their overall well-being, helping them live better, more successful and productive lives through the important work that you do, which is Clifton Strengths coaching. I know that this Gallup podcast that is, again, thriving, but on the state of the global workplace, it can really help elevate your coaching practice, because what we give you is a perspective and kind of like a quick download on the key thematics or the key trends, so that you can walk into any of those coaching conversations really informed on Gallup's latest perspective. I know you have other sources of news and information, but as an extension of the Gallup brand, I know how much kind of global expectation there is when you walk in the door and you say, I'm a Gallup Global Certified Coach. That comes with so much of an expectation to know all the things. And it's impossible to know all the things, but we really try hard to curate the conversations that matter most and really spotlight and get underneath some of the challenges, the opportunities, the considerations, the curiosities of leaders today, so that you can show up to those conversations and really focus on strengths in the context of the broader conversation that's happening right now.
The good news is we already have several episodes, and maybe by the time this drops in the Call to Coach channel, we'll have them all, and folks can go binge on them.
Mhm.
Kristen, what's been your favorite so far? Like, sometimes as hosts, we have aha moments through
That's
this.
right.
For you, have you had a moment where you've been talking about something, interviewing someone, thinking through this, and where you're like, man, this really hits with me? What's your highlight so far?
Absolutely. Oh, it's a good question. It's like you're trying to have me pick a favorite child or something. This is impossible, Jim. But I will say, although every episode contains an aha moment that I think has been particularly thought-provoking, insightful, so I've certainly walked away from every conversation with the guests that we have had on. But, in reflecting back, one episode in particular, I think the conversation will get kind of at the heart of some information that would really help the certified coach community, and that is on the topic of culture. So I spoke to two of my colleagues, Heather Barrett and Ed O'Boyle, on the topic of culture, and we really unpacked why and how it's so challenging for leaders to not only understand it, but to harness the full potential and really kind of consider, are all of the elements kind of working in sync? Are there any elements that aren't serving our customers, our employees? But is that whole cohesive brand message resonating kind of at every single touch point? And we really look at all the angles as it relates to, okay, there's an employee experience of the organization, and certainly strengths plays into that. Having a strength-based conversation and relationship with your manager and your colleagues is one important element of a culture. But then how that transcends out into your partner or your client community is a really important dynamic that I don't think often gets talked about. We talk about strength-based organizations, but in this podcast, we really kind of elevate that up above and beyond and realize strengths is a tool. And many of our clients are aspiring to or pointing their culture at some other very specific definition, and that's okay. Strengths can absolutely serve that broader cultural aspiration, help them get from current state to future state. And I think the more that we understand those broader goals, I think this podcast conversation, again, with Heather and Ed, really illuminates the importance of that work and some of the conversations that we can have with our client leaders to then position strengths just right within the context of culture.
I mean, I like Ed, but Heather is dynamite,
Yes, she
and
is.
I think, yeah, she is. Very first
But I
time I
love
heard
Ed too.
I mean, I love Ed, don't get me wrong, but the first time I heard Heather internally, I was like, "Oh, how do
Yep.
we get more of this?" Has that episode, as of the 29th of August, has that episode been released? Is that out
It
there and
sure
available
has.
right now?
It's
Okay.
available for listening now, and I encourage you to do so. I couldn't agree more. I am lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with those two. Heather and Ed are incredible and particularly sharp on the topic of culture. So it's
Yeah.
like you get them at their best when talking about this topic. So it's certainly a podcast worth listening to.
I just feel smarter every time I watch it
Me too.
from hearing her, both her and Ed. And we've had Ed on Called to Coach. Ann has been part of our certified coaches learning series from
Oh,
time to time.
good,
So
good.
certainly great voices. Kristen, Gallup has been researching, workers and employers for decades. We have been, through our Q12 tools and other tools, we have been surveying. We have had some of the best data on this.
Mhm,
Why the podcast now? Like,
mhm.
why do we feel like we wanted to go with this now?
Such a great question. It's almost how could we not now in a way? As we all know, we've lived through such an extraordinary time of change, and leaders are always confronted with change and important decisions. But it certainly feels like we're at a precipice of living out all of that kind of at once as we think about some of the complexities that on face value, return to office might just seem like a policy, but there's so much more underneath. Do we return to the office full time? Is it a mandate? Is it hybrid? If it's a hybrid, how do we know that we've got managers that are great managers that also are equipped to have the right conversations? Because we know that people are stressed. So stress is at a high, engagement is high, but the majority of people across the globe are not engaged, which is a problem. So we've got stress, we've got engagement challenges, burnout. Is a real dilemma as it relates to managers in particular. And managers are 70% of the variance as it relates to engagement, what you were just talking about, Jim. And so when you think about all of that in the stew right now, when we think about as our leaders refer to it, and with our recent book by Dr. Jim Harder and Jim Clifton, Culture Shock, that we are living out and in the time of so much workplace
Mhm.
turmoil and change and important decisions that continue to need to be made and then continue to be reconsidered, because it's not a one-time decision, it's an everyday decision. How are we showing up for each other? And does whatever our decision as it relates to workplace location, is it supported by all of those kind of cultural attributes that we were just talking about? Are we giving people development and recognition and performance management in a way that's consistent with our asks and expectations of their location? So it just feels like right now we need more guidance, more data, more insight, more what are other people doing? What should we be doing now more than ever?
Yeah. Two words that have
Mhm.
come up that we just didn't invent, like, and they existed before the pandemic, but stress and burnout
I know.
are two words that we're spending a lot of time and we're seeing in our data, and we're measuring more. We're asking questions around those more. As we think about the major changes that are taking place, what are we seeing? As we think about those two words, burnout and stress,
Mhm.
what are we seeing in that, and what kind of things are coming out of the research that we've been getting over the last year or two around those
Yeah.
two feelings
Yeah.
that people are having in the workplace?
Well, we're certainly seeing heightened levels of stress. We talked about that. And, we've been studying, while there is no right answer or one right approach for workplaces, in the culture shock book, we explore, and in some of the podcast episodes, we certainly explore this idea of hybrid work, which is coming to an office 3 days a week. And we find that individuals that do that have optimal engagement. So we're finding that location does matter, expectation relative to where do I think I can do my best work relative to my employer's expectation of where I need to do my best work. Those dynamics all play into some of the burnout and stress that we're seeing, because we know that you're more likely to be or you have a greater chance to burn out, I should say, if there's a mismatch between your location and your desired location. And so as an organization, we really owe it to our employees to help not only the teams understand, well, what is their job? We on one of the episodes we talk about reframing that because there can sometimes be an expectation of the job being very much about individual contribution and performance. And while we know that there can be some production gains anywhere, depending on where you are for one's personal contributions, what we might need to be thinking about is reframing some of those jobs, excuse me, as being more of a collaborative situation. How are we mentoring? Excuse me, I need to take a sip as
Yeah,
well, if you
yeah,
don't
go
mind.
ahead.
My
No, no,
voice is going. Hold on.
no worries. While you're doing that, talk to a little bit about, I mean, I think what's causing some of this tension is we still haven't really figured out remote working.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
we've talked about it.
Yep.
We've said, and it again, that's remote workers aren't a new thing, but certainly it seemed like we went through a time where
Yep.
it was for a lot of people and not everybody. I think we sometimes think everybody went home, and we have a huge segment of the workforce
Yeah.
globally that
Yeah.
didn't.
Right.
They still had to go to work, right? We have to
Right.
remember them. So I think we're still trying to figure out this remote working. Do you think that question is
Mm,
causing some of the stress as well? I kind of heard
mhm.
you
Yeah.
leading towards that a little bit.
So stress absolutely is affected and is a part of the current conversation because we know, like I said, with burnout, when there's that mismatch, if I believe I can do my best work in a location and my employer doesn't agree, that creates a situation where I might get frustrated. I might be trying to compensate to show or to prove that I really can when we just fundamentally disagree about maybe what the roles and the expectations of the job are. So whenever there's a misalignment in expectations, that can lead to stress, certainly. But we also know that, if you're remote, exclusively remote, and maybe you think that the workplace expects you to be on site more, that creates an element of stress to that worry, the am I taking advantage? And this is something that I think we should all be thinking about as we're coaching and consulting clients. Um, is what is maybe the opportunity or the concern in taking advantage of a policy? Because it can create a bit of stress if you don't fundamentally believe your employer is okay with you working 2 days from home or 3 days or exclusively remote. If you worry, you wake up worried, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right spot? That's a stressful element of your day that doesn't go away. It just gets stronger the longer and longer you might live in that policy or in that distant location. And so those are all kind of weighing heavily on employees and leaders and managers alike, that from a strength-based perspective, we all have access to as strength-based coaches to try to help individuals have those maybe more frank and honest conversations about where they want their career to go and whether or not their choice in living out that hybrid policy, that 100%
Mhm.
remote policy is in service to or potentially hindering their aspirational goals to be a leader, a manager. And those are real honest conversations that we need to have, and strengths can be a real aid to that.
Yeah, and that's just one. That's
Mhm.
just one topic, right? In that, and you mentioned strengths being, being a solution
Mhm.
in building an engaged and strengths based workplace. What other factors? Let's get a little more positive. I think a lot of folks know the negatives of what's going on in the workforce. As we
Yeah.
think about the positives, what are some of those key factors that you guys are focusing on when we think about building an engaged workforce?
Yeah. Well, some of the advantage that we all have as students of Clifton Strengths, or if we've been familiar with the Q12 for some time, those elements of engagement transcend location. So while the current complexities of the 2023 return to office dilemma decision is a new kind of point of emphasis on the broader conversation, employee engagement transcends that. And so as we think about what human beings need to thrive at work, those core elements matter whether you're remote in California, as I once was, or I'm in an office, which I am now most days, if not all days. Those elements of, do I have clear expectations? Am I getting the right recognition? Do I feel like my opinions count? It doesn't matter where I am. Those elements remain to be the drivers of my engagement and the very thing that can help keep us from being stressed or burnt out. And so as we think about that, we're in a bit of an advantage to say, okay, while the location complexity is new, we know these are important elements. We can get to work on delivering for our managers, for our teams, for ourselves. But we really have to challenge ourselves to think about, well, what needs to change? Or in our coaching to a leader, how might they confront the change that needs to happen to deliver on expectations or recognition to a hybrid team and not just fall on some of those practices, which is, well, I'll give them a high five in the elevator when I see them because I can know that always happens and I can count on that. We're not so fortunate to have those kind of flyby interactions anymore. We really have to be intentional. So it gives us an opportunity to level up our coaching game, I think, as we talk to managers about, well, what does it mean to have a plan for recognition or for helping people understand or feel that they're heard throughout the week, so you don't leave it to chance and you have a very equal playing field for those that are hybrid, on-site, remote, exclusively remote. But the elements, I think it really does give us an advantage to know that strengths is a catalyst to engagement, right? And so if we get to work on the fundamentals of engagement, it's what we expect of each other and from our workplace, strengths being a catalyst to that progress, to engagement, you're really coming to the table with a tool that leaders, managers, teams need now more than ever to break down those maybe traditional habits of, we'll see you when we see you, we'll talk about that over lunch in the cafeteria, and really help break down the barriers between, well, they're the hybrid team, we're the on-site team, that common language and that accelerator to engagement, I think is important now more than ever.
2 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long. 2 years ago, we released Well-Being at Work.
Mhm.
How much is that playing into, as we think of the state of the global workplace,
Yeah.
well-being solutions, folks talking about? Are you guys talking about that on the
We
podcast
sure
as
are.
well?
We sure
Yeah.
are. Yep, absolutely. And so, well-being is a really important topic. Lucky enough to have some of our Gallup experts speak on the topic, Dan Witters, but also a client, Alden Lai, joined us, and he talked a lot about some of the important work and research that his team is doing. And so it was a pleasure having that conversation. Well-being is really an important part of the why now. So when you mention, gosh, why are we having this conversation today? Why is the podcast a now conversation? Well, when you think about well-being being the five elements, that purpose or the work component really is one of, if not the most important element of that well-being equation. Because when you think about the relationship that you have at work, that's spiraling into your financial health. How well are you doing at work? Can you really be sound in your financial health if work isn't going so well? Your social well-being can suffer depending on how work is going for you that day, how well attached or involved you feel in community, your physical involvement. I mean, the list goes on and on. The one that we as coaches to leaders and managers, or as managers and leaders ourselves, or even as employees in the workplace can control the most truly is the work or the purpose component of well-being. And so if we just get to work, not to say the others don't matter, but in our coaching of leaders and managers to help them see they really do have a broad platform and a responsibility to care for the well-being of their team, that can help prevent burnout, because the more engaged, the more thriving individuals are at work, the more thriving they are in life, and we really can get to work on burnout.
I feel like in years past, we covered over some of these topics.
Mhm.
We knew they existed in the workplace, but we
Mhm.
were like, well, yeah, but right. Even 10 years ago, well-being isn't getting the traction that it's getting today. The ideas of stress and burnout were there, it seems like maybe the topsoil has been cleared off and we're getting down to the roots of things,
Right.
which I think is really, really healthy. However, it's causing some really hard conversations. And I think being engaged in a podcast like this, in the report like this, makes us smarter and helps us navigate the clearing, so to speak. Because I think a lot of people are asking a lot of questions. We
Yeah.
know this podcast is tied to the state of the global workplace
Mhm.
report. We've committed to kind of doing that annually now. Talk a little bit about how do I use the two of these together? Like
Mhm.
I downloaded that report, Kristen. It's
Yeah.
I struggle to get all the way through. It's maybe not something you read from front to back, but how can I how can I use, or maybe it is for some. How do I way smarter than me? How do I use the podcast and the report together?
Right. This was made for all of us. This podcast was made for all of us. And I know many of us don't have learner number one, which I do. So I'm like, oh, that report sounds like a dream. That's
And you're
not.
like, how could you not read that cover to cover,
No, I'm
Jim?
kidding.
Come on.
I'm kidding, but it's a lot. And so what I would encourage you to do if you're new to the State of the Global Workplace Report by Gallup, I would encourage you to listen to the podcast because it's 6 short episodes and we will introduce you to key thematic topics in the report. And so really it's almost like a table of contents or a highlight reel for you as it relates to what you need to know in the workplace report. So if you listen to the podcast and you find inspiration, you're intrigued, it sparks some curiosity for you, then I would invite you to go deeper in the report itself because I'm sure that questions that you have, we could not cover all the components of the conversation, but if you're looking for more, the report is a perfect place for you to go. And I hope that it can help guide you or inspire you once you listen to the podcast as to why you might explore a chapter or some information on a part of the world as it relates to their happiness and engagement.
Do you feel like the two complement each other in a way that is
Yeah.
this what I heard you say you can go back and forth between them, or start with the podcast and go back to the report, or start with the report and
Absolutely.
see what's said in the podcast? Yeah.
Yes, there's no right or wrong way to consume it. So absolutely, you can jump in and out depending on what intrigues you. Certainly I'm reflecting on a conversation that I had with one of our managing partners, Paul Sinyan, and we talked about in Europe as an example, an element. So the business that I am most closely tied to at Gallup is US focused. But of course, we're a global organization. And so my colleague in Europe really helped kind of put a curiosity in my mind about how in Europe, although they're among the happiest in their lives, they're pretty miserable at work. And so through that conversation with Pa, he and I explored that a bit, but I have a lot more that based on that conversation that I had with Pa that I wouldn't necessarily have
Mhm.
or have sought out given the focus of my own business. It gives me a different perspective that I can bring to the coaching community and my clients as it relates to, well, why might that be? And if you, like me, are curious about that, you can certainly read a whole lot more on what's in the data that backs up that general statement or feeling that we unpacked on the podcast.
Yeah, that's great. No, Pa is great. If you haven't heard him before, he's awesome as well. You should go over and get that episode.
Yeah.
Lisa's got a couple comments from some social proof. I'll bring it in. She says, I'm hearing a strong correlation between career well-being and purpose. I like that. Purpose is a concept I've heard needed. And that's another word, by the way. We've been asking about purpose for a long time, but it's another word that's kind of come to the foreground. She says here, needs to be heard more. And then she says she has low learner as well. Looking forward to the podcast.
It's great.
She does bring a question in, and she said, "Will it be posted on Eventbrite?" Now these are already recorded. We're recording them like podcasts, so we don't do them live, but they are available already in your podcast app. So just search Gallup Thriving in that on your favorite podcast app, and they'll be available for you there. You can download them, get subscribe to it, so you make sure you don't miss them. And we'd love to have you start consuming those now. They're available for those listening live right now. For those listening to the podcast on Call to Coach right now, get out there and get it done. What's coming up? What's the future? What's next for the podcast as we kind of wrap this up today?
It's a really great question, Jim. And the podcast is really meant to be topical, timely, but also have an element of evergreen in it. And so the podcast series, 6 short episodes, will be available for you as an opportunity to listen throughout the year. And so it's meant to help kind of pull the report insights out beyond just an event or a moment in time when the report launches, and allow you to come back to them. Because as things change, as your own clients' needs change, you might come back to the podcast with maybe a different lens or a different kind of question on your mind. And so those will remain available. And my colleague Mohammed, he will continue to do the Gallup podcast, the primary kind of podcast. And we don't know. We don't know if we'll do another series of this particular one, but it will be a resource for you regardless. And so it's been a pleasure to get into the conversation for everyone.
I'm going to say to this audience, I don't, these guys know that I'm pretty forward about, influencing them to do things. Go out and listen to this. And if you like it, let us know. Like, this is one of those not great to be quiet on. I really enjoy it. Let us know that you send us some feedback, coaching@gallup.com if you want to send that in. We would love, we are a survey research company, so we would love your feedback on this as you get out there. What really worked? What didn't? How could we do it better for you? Sometime in 2024, we're going to release the State of the Global Workplace again. And your feedback, your comments will help us decide whether we go this route or again. So make sure you let us know. We live and die by that feedback, and we love it. So make sure you're getting that in, you're getting to us. We'd love to really have you kind of try that out. Want to thank those who joined us today. And Kristen, thank you for doing what you do. I'm excited to see how things go. It's so much more fun to launch a podcast when it's already all out there for the most part, right?
Yes.
To say, go listen to it now. Oftentimes sometimes we do this and like, well, we're thinking about doing this.
Right.
It's kind of nice. Any other final thoughts before I let you go for the day?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Jim. It's always a pleasure. And it's great to see so many of the names scrolling through on the comments of the certified coach community. I really appreciate all that you all do every day in service of your clients, managers, leaders. The strength-based coaching component is such an important part of our mission and purpose at Gallup and the work that we do. And you're such an important part of that. So I really thank you. And I hope you find value in the podcast, and hope you tune in soon.
I think they will. Kristen, hang tight for me. Don't go anywhere. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we do have available now in Gallup Access as well for our strengths and our strengths coaches. Check it out now, my.gallup.com to sign in. Lots of resources available for you there for coaching, master coaching. You want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, or you've heard this boss to coach thing that we're doing and you're interested in jumping in on that as well. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. We'll get somebody back to you to answer some of those questions for you. Find us on any social platform. Follow us and find us just by searching CliftonStrengths. And we appreciate you guys coming out today. Thanks for everybody who joined us live, both on LinkedIn and on YouTube. I'll post links to the State of the Global Workplace plus the podcast here in just a few minutes. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.